I knew something was wrong the moment they stopped laughing. It wasn't the kind of silence that fills a room after a punchline lands flat. No, this was different. It was sharp, heavy, alive. Like everyone had suddenly remembered I wasn't supposed to be there. The scent of lavender candles still hung thick in the air, layered with sweet wine and artificial strawberry lip gloss. The living room lights were dim, flickering golden against the walls, and soft R&B played from a Bluetooth speaker on the kitchen counter. Voices had been swirling around, the kind that rise and fall, full of giggles and fake sympathy. The girls' night was supposed to feel warm, easy, but instead, it felt staged and suddenly, every eye was on me. "Hey, you made it," Tara called out, crossing the room with her wide, practiced smile. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, but her perfume stung the back of my throat. Something about her touch, light, too careful, told me she hadn't expected me to actually show up. I forced a smile. "You said not to be late." She laughed, a short, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, we started without you. Hope you don't mind." Her words slid off me like oil, but somewhere deep in my chest, I felt a small twist. I glanced around at the others, girls I'd known for years. College friends, co-workers, neighbors. Their dresses were coordinated unintentionally and intentionally all at once, soft pastels, curated curls, freshly done nails. They looked at me the way people stare at a stranger who's just opened the wrong door. "Wow, you actually came," one of them muttered under her breath. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I poured myself a drink from the counter, praying the rustle of ice would drown out the whispering behind me, but there's always one sound your body never fails to recognize. Quiet laughter meant for someone else. It came from the corner sofa, a cluster of them huddled together, phone screens glowing faintly. My name left someone's lips in a half-suppressed giggle, and I froze mid-pour. The air thickened. Then came the picture. I didn't see it, but I felt it. That hushed wave of shock from the ones who hadn't seen it before, followed by the smug silence from the ones who had. "Tara," I said softly, setting my glass down. "What's going on?" She looked at me, wine glass in hand, lashes lowered just enough to hide something cruel. "Relax," she said. "It's just a bit of fun." But her smile wavered when she said it, and I realized she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "A bit of fun." It echoed, louder, meaner. The screen light flashed again, someone trying to hide it under her hand. And then I saw it. Me. My photo. Grainy, zoomed in, stolen. Not the kind you'd ever want shown around. Not the kind that was supposed to exist. "What is this?" My voice came out low, trembling between anger and disbelief. Tara tilted her head and took a slow sip. "Come on, it's not that serious. You said worse about us before. Don't pretend to be innocent." Another voice added, "She's been talking behind everyone's back." "You think we don't know? Talking behind their backs?" That wasn't true. But how do you argue with laughter? With whispers? With the collective gaze of 10 people pretending this was all justified? I felt heat crawl up my arms. That picture, who took it? No one answered. The music kept playing. A slow love song that suddenly sounded cold. One of the girls, Kara, looked away quickly and muttered, "Maybe you should just go." Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have walked out right then with what was left of my dignity. But humiliation has this strange gravity. It holds you in place, makes you stand there like you're part of some sick performance you never auditioned for. My throat burned. My ears rang. Behind every laugh echoing down those walls, I heard every secret, every kindness I ever shared with Tara reshaped, twisted. She had planned this. Every detail. The candles. The playlist. The invites. The timing. She wanted witnesses. When I finally met her eyes, something quiet inside me cracked. "Why, Tara?" Her expression shifted, just for a moment, from smug to something weary. Then she said it like it was nothing at all. "Because you deserve it." There it was. No shouting, no theatrics. Just 4 words that made the floor disappear beneath me. The sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door, trying to keep each step steady. But before I reached it, she called out again, "Guess secrets don't stay hidden forever, huh?" The words lodged deep in my chest, like a splinter. I turned, slowly. "What are you talking about?" Tara just smiled, that same brittle smile. "Ask your mother." And that was the second I knew this wasn't about a photo. This wasn't just tonight. This was something buried deeper, older. I stood there, still enough to hear the clink of someone setting their glass down. My mother, I repeated, confused, small. But Tara didn't answer. She just looked at me like she'd said too much. Or exactly enough. That night, I didn't cry. I drove home in silence, the music off, the streetlights blurring past my windshield like slow lightning. Every reflection in the glass looked like a question I couldn't form yet. When I got to my apartment, I sat in the dark. My phone buzzed over and over, messages, missed calls, notifications. Someone had sent the picture to a group chat. Then another person. And another. I didn't look at any of them. I just sat there, staring at the tiny red light blinking on my answering machine, blinking, blinking, like it was waiting for me to admit something I didn't even understand yet. Ask your mother. That phrase looped in my head until sunrise. By morning, every ounce of confusion had curdled into dread. When I finally dialed her number, her voice came cheerful as ever, humming, distracted, making breakfast like it was any other day. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said. "You sound tired." "I didn't sleep." "Oh, back from that girl thing last night?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Mom, can we talk? About something?" Her hum faltered just slightly on the other end. "Of course. What's wrong?" I hesitated. "Tara said something weird." "About what?" She said. I swallowed hard. "She said to ask you. About secrets." The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was too careful. Too heavy. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "That girl always did have a wild imagination." "She wasn't joking," I said. "What is she talking about?" "She's jealous of you, that's all." "Forget it." But the tremor in her tone betrayed her. And in that small crack of nervousness, I caught something I had never heard before from her, fear. I almost pressed her further. Almost said what I was thinking. But the words stuck in my throat like stones. My mother, the one person I trusted most in this world, was afraid of a lie that hadn't even been spoken aloud yet. That was the moment everything began to shift, before I even knew what I was looking for, before I knew how deep it would go that night, at that party. They laughed because they thought they knew something about me that I didn't. But Tara's eyes told me the truth. What she had revealed wasn't just my humiliation. It was the key to something she wanted me to find, and I would. Even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family and myself before everything fell apart, my life was simple. Predictable, even. The kind of quiet rhythm that feels boring until the day it vanishes and you'd give anything to hear it again, the hum of the kettle, the smell of laundry detergent, my mother's voice calling me pumpkin from the other room. We lived in a small house on Holloway Street, tucked behind the old library with peeling blue shutters and a garden that always looked half-finished. My mother had this habit of planting too many flowers and never quite remembering to water them all. So our garden bloomed in patches, bursts of color surrounded by wilt. It was messy, a little imperfect, but full of life. Just like her, she worked as a local nurse at St. Agnes Hospital, always the one people called at odd hours. Even when she was bone-tired, she found a way to smile through her exhaustion. Everyone loved her. The neighbors, the mailman, even the stray cat that refused to leave our porch, and I believed, for most of my life, that she was the purest person I knew. I grew up in that small town where secrets had short legs, they never traveled far before someone tripped over them. But my mother and we didn't seem to have secrets. She told me everything. Or so I thought. Mornings were her kingdom. The smell of toasted bread and ginger tea filling the air before sunrise. The low hum of her radio playing a gospel station too faint to make out the words. I'd sit at the counter, head buried in my phone or some leftover coursework, while she recited the tasks of the day like a soldier reviewing orders. "Eat something real, not just coffee," she'd say. "And don't forget to stop by Mrs. Finley's to return her book." "Yes, Mom," I'd reply, without looking up. "Don't you? Yes, Mommy. I mean it." That was our rhythm. The safe kind of love that wraps around you until you forget it's even there. After college, I stayed close. Took a job as a junior accountant in town. It wasn't glamorous, but it made rent and let me care for her after her arthritis started flaring up. Most nights, we'd eat dinner together, stir-fry, canned soup, whatever we could throw together. She'd tell me gossip from the hospital, and I'd tell her the funny things my co-workers did that day. It was mundane, yes. But it was ours. Then came Tara and I met at work. She was the kind of woman people noticed, confident, polished, always slightly louder than the moment needed her to be. We clicked in the way opposites often do. She was quick and daring, and I was quieter, slower to trust. But somehow, she made me laugh. She pulled me out of routines I didn't even know I was stuck in. We started hanging out after work, quick lunches, weekend movie nights. Over time, she became a fixture in my world. My mother liked her well enough, though I noticed something in her eyes whenever Tara's name came up. Something cautious, almost disapproving. "Be careful with that one," she said once while chopping vegetables. "She likes attention too much." "She's just lively," I said, smiling. "You'd like her if you got to know her better. People who need too much attention from the world rarely have enough left for kindness," she murmured, not looking up. I didn't argue, but I remember thinking she was wrong. Tara was fun, generous, outgoing. The kind of person who made everything a little more exciting. Looking back, I can't tell if she really was all those things, or if I just wanted her to be. At first, there were no signs of tension, no strange remarks, no tension with my mother, no reason to be wary. It all felt harmless. She'd stop by the house sometimes, say hello, charm Mom with compliments about her cooking. And though my mother smiled politely, her warmth never quite reached him. There were small things, though. Fleeting moments that make sense only in hindsight, like the time Tara asked a little too many questions about my family. Or the way she seemed startled when she saw a photo of my mother holding me as a baby. She said something odd I can still hear clear as day: "You look nothing like her." I laughed it off then, telling her I took after my dad's side. But Tara had tilted her head, eyes narrowed, studying me like she was trying to solve a puzzle no one had asked her to. "Is your dad still around?" she had asked. "No, he passed away when I was little." She'd smiled, sympathetic but curious. "I'm sorry. You must miss him." The truth was, I didn't really remember him at all. He died when I was 3, or that's what my mother told me. Sometimes I'd find her sitting on the porch in the evenings, eyes lost somewhere far away, and I knew she was thinking of him. Once or twice, I caught her crying softly, clutching an old locket she kept in her nightstand. It wasn't until years later that I realized I'd never actually seen a single photograph of them together. Our life moved in quiet circles: home, work, dinners, church on Sundays. It wasn't extraordinary, but it was something steady to wake up to. That kind of peace makes you believe nothing hidden could possibly live underneath. Even the week before that awful girls' night, the house felt normal. My mother had been humming more lately, distracted but cheerful. She baked cookies she said were for a colleague's retirement party, though I never saw her take them anywhere. I remember her calling me into the kitchen that evening. "Taste this," she said, handing me one of those still warm chocolate chip cookies. "You always were my taste tester." I laughed. "You're just trying to get me fat." Fat and happy, then. The smell of sugar and browned butter filled the narrow space between us. That scent still follows me sometimes, in places it doesn't belong, like perfume trapped in the air from a life that's gone. If there was any sign back then that something was wrong, I missed it completely. Even when she seemed oddly protective, asking who I was with, where I was going, calling twice when I was late from work, I just thought it was parental worry. I didn't realize how fragile her calm really was. Or how carefully built her illusions had been. On the morning of the girls' night, she was sitting by the window in her robe, sipping tea. Sun spilled across the table, catching the silver streaks in her hair. She looked peaceful, the kind of peaceful that hides exhaustion like a secret. "You're going out with Tara tonight?" she asked. I nodded, tying my hair. "Yeah, girls' night. Movies and wine, probably." Her gaze lingered a moment longer than usual. "Just be careful, all right? With Tara. She's harmless." She gave a small, knowing smile. "People always say that right before they learn otherwise." I rolled my eyes. "You worry too much." "That's my job," she said softly, and reached over to straighten my collar, just like she used to when I was a teenager. But her hand hesitated there on my shoulder, like she wanted to add something and decided against it. I left without asking what it was. If I'd looked back that morning, I might have seen it. The way she watched me walk down the driveway, eyes glassy, the teacup trembling slightly in her grasp. Maybe she already knew what Tara was planning. Maybe she'd been waiting, dreading this moment, the one where the truth would start creeping to the surface, but back then, I didn't notice anything. I was just a daughter going to have fun with friends. That's what I remember most vividly, the peaceful normalcy right before everything fractured. The morning light through the curtains, the half-full mug of tea beside her chair, the faint hum of birds outside, they were all the last echoes of the life I thought I knew. The day after the girls' night, I stayed in bed until noon. I didn't even move when sunlight spilled across the sheets, or when my phone buzzed every few minutes with messages I couldn't bring myself to open. Shame does that to you, it freezes you, makes everything heavy. Even the thought of standing up felt impossible, like the world outside my room had turned poisonous. But the thing about embarrassment is, once the sting fades, confusion takes its place. And confusion demands answers. By evening, I'd made tea and finally sat on the couch, scrolling through the messages. There were screenshots from group chats, blurred out memes, one photo that someone had quietly sent with a single line, "You should know what they're saying." The image wasn't explicit, thank God, but humiliating enough. A candid shot Tara had taken months ago at an office weekend trip, one where I'd fallen. Asleep on a couch, mouth open, makeup smudged. Someone had added text to it, a cruel joke referencing things I'd told Tara privately. Things about my family. That was the first crack. The realization that the people I trusted had not just laughed at me, they had weaponized pieces of my life I didn't even consider shameful until they twisted them. And among the whispers, there it was, the phrase that made my skin go cold: "She's not even who she says she is." I leaned back, staring at the words. Not who I say I am. What did that even mean? I shut my phone off and went to the kitchen. The house was completely still except for the ticking of the old wall clock. The same one that had filled the silence since I was a child. My mother's voice would usually hum along behind it, giving that steady rhythm warmth. But tonight, she was quiet. She was sitting at the table when I found her, hands clasped around a cup of tea, staring through the window as if the night outside held more comfort than I did. She looked up, startled, when I spoke. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you know Tara?" Something unreadable passed through her eyes. "Of course, I know her. She's your friend." "She's not my friend," I said, sharper than I meant. "She tried to humiliate me." My mother's mouth tightened. "What did she do?" I told her, piece by piece. The party, the mocking laughter, Tara's final words. "She said I should ask you," I finished quietly. "About a secret. Do you understand what she meant?" The air in the kitchen shifted. It was like watching someone close a door behind their eyes. "I think she's just trying to hurt you," my mother said after a long silence. "You shouldn't give her that power." "Maybe," I said, but she seemed so sure. "People like her always do." Her voice hardened, and she took a long sip of tea before standing. "Forget her. She's jealous, troubled, whatever. You don't owe her a single thought." It should have ended there. But it didn't. Because something about the way she avoided looking at me made the tea in my hand taste faintly metallic. There was tension in her every movement now, like she was balancing a story that might collapse if she took one wrong breath. That night, as I lay awake, the smallest detail replayed in my mind, the corner of our family photo in the hallway, taped at the edges, slightly yellowed with age. My mother always kept it dusted, always scented. But I'd glanced at it earlier and noticed something strange. The picture was uneven inside the frame, as if it had been pulled out and put back hurriedly. In that moment, a small seed of unease took root. I couldn't name it, but it sat heavy in my chest. The following afternoon, when my mother left for her shift at the hospital, I found myself standing in front of that same photo. It was from my 3rd birthday party, me in a bright red dress, frosting smeared on my cheeks, my mother smiling beside me. I'd seen it 100 times. But that day, I pulled it away from the wall and opened the frame. Behind it was another photograph, much older. The edges curled, colors faded to near sepia. It was of my mother, younger, holding a baby that wasn't me. The handwriting on the back said, "For Lily, keep her safe." Lily wasn't my mother's name. Not legally, not the one she used. I felt something cold ripple through me. Had she changed her name? Why? I put the photo back carefully, sliding it under the first as if I could pretend I'd never found it. But that night, when she came home, I could barely meet her eyes. She seemed tired, too tired. She set her bag down and smiled faintly. You look pale. Are you okay, Pumpkin? Pumpkin. That word, once warm, now felt misplaced. I'm fine, I murmured. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Good. I was worried about you. After everything with Tara. Her voice trailed off, and a quiet fell between us. The kind that grows out of things unsaid. I wanted to ask about the photograph, about the name Lily, but the fear of the answer froze me. So we both sat there, pretending everything was normal while the truth pulsed between us like static. The next morning, I woke to find her gone. She'd left a note on the table, double shift. Don't wait up. But beneath that note, folded neatly in half, was an envelope. No address, no stamp, just my name on the front. Inside was another photograph. This one recent. It showed me and Tara at a cafe, laughing. And written in pen across the bottom were words that shouldn't have shaken me as much as they did. You look alike. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. We didn't look alike. Tara had lighter skin, sharper features, a different smile. And yet, there was something there. Something around the eyes, the curve of the jaw. A faint resemblance I'd never noticed until someone forced me to see it. It made no sense. That was when I realized someone had gone through my things. That photo had come from my drawers. It wasn't public, wasn't on social media. Which meant either Tara had been in my apartment, or my mother had, and neither option made me feel safe. I texted Tara that afternoon. The message was simple. What did you mean last night? What secret? 4 hours. There was no reply. Then, at midnight, a single message came through. Ask again. But be ready when she tells you. I sat in the dark long after that, phone clutched in my palm, trying to steady my breathing. Every instinct told me to drop it, to let whatever this was stay hidden. But there's something about not knowing that drives people slowly mad. That restless, clawing feeling had roots now, pulling at me from somewhere deep beneath the life I thought I knew. So I opened the drawer again, pulled out the picture labeled for Lily, and turned it over one more time. The handwriting was careful, almost trembling, like someone writing in a hurry. And at the bottom, faint but visible under the light, was a partial signature. T, something. Maybe a T and a curl that could have been an A. Tara.it couldn't be. But the loop on the letter, the slant, they matched. Not identically, but close enough that my stomach knotted. What if the connection between Tara and my mother wasn't coincidental at all? What if this wasn't revenge or gossip, but something older, a story both of them already knew? I didn't sleep that night. Didn't move, didn't even blink much. Just sat there, the picture in one hand and 1,000 questions buzzing in my head like angry bees. By morning, I knew one thing. I couldn't just ask my mother anymore. She wouldn't tell me, not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable, and deep down, though I didn't want to admit it, I could already feel the shape of the truth forming. A whisper inside me that said what Tara had tried to tell me wasn't a taunt. I didn't plan to search her things. It just happened that morning. The house was still, washed in cold light leaking through the blinds. The smell of old tea lingered from the night before. My mother had left early again, or maybe she hadn't come home at all. Her shoes weren't by the door. The clock ticked steady, pretending everything was normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. I couldn't stop looking at that old photograph tucked in my pocket, the one that said for Lily, keep her safe. My fingers fidgeted around its edges like they were tracing the borders of my own skin, searching for what matched and what didn't. By noon, I gave in to the gnawing pull that had been growing since last night. If my mother wouldn't tell me, I'd find the truth myself. Her room smelled like lavender and starch, everything folded too neatly to feel lived in. Nurse uniforms hanging by color books stacked by height, drawers filled with small, careful order. Not a single corner out of place. I almost turned back, guilt thrumming in my chest. But then I saw something, an old mahogany box under her bed, edges worn soft like something long-handled but rarely opened. Inside were papers, bundled with rubber bands, old pay stubs, hospital forms, and a thin envelope labeled with a date. The year of my birth. My name was written across it. I remember my hands shaking as I slid it open. Inside were 2 documents, my birth certificate and a hospital discharge form. But what made my breath hitch was the signature line Mother, Lillian Carter was written in bold. Not Lily. Lillian. But the name right below it, father, was left blank, and then, in faint pencil near the bottom corner, almost erased, someone had written a name I'd never seen before: Thomas Avery. The letters were smudged, but they were real. I dropped the papers onto the bed, pressing my palms to my temples. Thomas Avery. Why would someone's name be handwritten on an official document? Who was he? I searched the box again, slower this time, careful not to disturb her meticulous layering, each memory tucked away like stitches she never wanted pulled loose. And buried under old hospital papers, sealed in another envelope, was a photograph that shouldn't have existed. It was my mother, younger, maybe mid-20s, standing beside a man I'd never seen before. He looked tall, older, dressed in a simple work shirt. His arm draped effortlessly across her shoulders, and in her eyes, God, the way she looked at him, there was love, pure and unmistakable. On the back, in the same faint handwriting, were just 2 words: us, forever. Reality wavered. I sat down, gripping the edge of the bed before the room spun away. Every piece of my world began rearranging itself, quietly, mercilessly. The edges of her life didn't line up anymore. Not the names, not the years, not the details she used to tell with perfect recall. And suddenly, Tara's smirk at that party came back to me, like a whisper in the dark. Ask your mother. It all clicked too neatly. Too painfully. The name, the photograph, the signature. Tara had known this man's name, Thomas. She'd known something, and she'd wanted me to find it. I pulled my phone out and searched the name online. Thomas Avery, Holloway. Then Thomas Avery, hospital. Thomas Avery, obituary. One result caught my breath. A news clipping, 15 years old, archived from the local newspaper. Local craftsman Thomas Avery donates hand-carved benches to St. Agnes Hospital's new wing. He was there. My mother's hospital. My mother's past. The article came with a tiny picture. The same man from the photo, smiling beside a plaque that read in gratitude. My heart thundered. I don't remember leaving the house. Just the sound of car keys shaking in my grip and the hiss of the engine starting. The drive was only 15 minutes, but it felt longer. The world outside looked the same: shops, sidewalks, the smell of rain on asphalt, but I saw it all differently now, like the entire town had been built over secrets. At the hospital, I pretended to be looking for paperwork related to Mr. Avery's donation records. The clerk, a kind woman with grey curls and tired eyes, looked me up and down with faint recognition. You're Lily's daughter, aren't you? She said. I nodded. Yes. She smiled softly. She was close to him, back in the day. Thomas was a good man. Shame how things ended. My voice barely worked. How did they end? Her smile faltered. You mean you don't know? When I didn't answer, she pressed her lips together. I shouldn't say much, she murmured, leaning closer. But people talked. They said she was heartbroken when he left town. There was trouble with his family, I think. His family. A wife, maybe. Or someone he was supposed to marry. She shrugged. You hear things. My pulse roared in my ears. If that was true, if he had been married, or promised to someone, then my mother hadn't just loved him. She'd been part of a secret. A secret that had a name. And maybe, me, that thought sat heavy, dangerous, undeniable. She lied. She had to, about my father, about our life, about me. When I got home, dusk had already painted the house gold. Her car was still gone. My hands moved before I could think, gathering the pictures, the documents, the fragments of one woman's entire constructed story, and laying them on the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Each one whispered something different, but all led to the same quiet truth: that I wasn't who I thought I was. When the door finally opened, her voice broke the stillness. You're home, she said, stepping into the light and freezing when she saw the table. She blinked once, then again, her face paling by degrees. Where did you find those? In your room, I said flatly. You said there were no secrets. Her breath faltered. You went through my things. You told me to forget it, I snapped. But you knew. You knew what Tara meant. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet was louder than shouting. The soft buzz of the refrigerator was the only sound between us. Finally, she exhaled, sinking into the nearest chair. I was protecting you. From what? I demanded. The truth. That my father wasn't dead. Her eyes flicked up to mine, wide and wet. You don't know what you're saying. I do. His name is Thomas Avery. You were with him. And you lied about everything. Tears gathered in her lashes, but she didn't speak. I could see the battle waging behind her eyes, the urge to deny it warring with the exhaustion of years spent pretending. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Please, sit. I don't want, sit. Something in her tone, fragile but firm, made me obey. She fiddled with the corner of one of the photographs. You're right. His name was Thomas Avery. And yes, he knew about you. For a time. My chest ached. So, you lied about him dying? She nodded slowly. I didn't know what else to do. Her words hung heavy in the room. She looked so tired, so unbearably human. It wasn't meant to be like this, she whispered. I thought I could make it simple. Easier for you. Easier, I said. You built my whole life on a lie. You told me he was gone, that there was nothing to know. Trembling, she covered her face with both hands. He was married, sweetheart. He had another family. When he found out I was pregnant, he panicked. He wanted to fix it quietly, to spare everyone. And her voice cracked. I agreed. Because I loved him. The world tilted, just slightly. You were the secret, she said, sobbing softly. And then he left. For her. For them. Silence. No air left in the room. No words either. I felt hollow and raw, like every version of myself had been scraped out from within. So, you raised me alone, I said at last, barely a whisper. But why tell everyone he died? Why not tell me the truth? Because lies are easier to grieve than missing pieces, she said. I wanted to scream. But no sound came. Only that slow, aching realization that everything, my childhood, my trust, my friendships, had been sitting on a foundation that never existed. And Tara, somehow, had known all of it. I stared down at the picture of the man who might have been my father, at my mother's written plea for Lily, keep her safe, and felt an emotion somewhere between rage and sorrow. And my mother looked up at me then. You weren't supposed to find out this way. Then how? I asked, rising to my feet. How else was I ever supposed to find out who I really am? Her voice broke. When you were ready. But that was your choice, I said. Not mine. She didn't respond, and I realized she couldn't. She'd made her peace with the lie long ago. Even if I never would. That night, after she went to bed, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay surrounded by her silence anymore. Before I left, I looked at the photo one last time. His smile. Her hand in his. My entire life pressed between them like a forgotten footnote. I folded the picture and slid it into my jacket pocket. If there was truth left somewhere in this story, I'd find it myself. The next morning, the air felt paper-thin. Sunlight was pouring through the kitchen window like it always did, but it no longer reached me. It stopped halfway across the floor, as though even the light didn't want to trespass on what was left between us. And why Mother didn't come out of her room. I could hear her moving quietly inside, drawers sliding shut, the sink faucet trickling on and off. But no words. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you and hums with meaning. I wanted to knock, to say something, to ask why she'd waited all these years. But what was there left to ask? The truth had already landed between us, sharp-edged and irreversible. So I left. The car ride to the library felt endless, though it was only a few miles. I needed air, distance, a place to think without her eyes on me. The streets rolled past like a film I wasn't part of anymore. Every now and then, I caught myself glancing into shop windows at my own reflection, wondering if I'd ever actually looked like her, or if I'd only convinced myself I did. Inside the library, the carpet muffled every sound. I sat down with my laptop and typed his name again, Thomas Avery. The profile that came up wasn't much: an address in a neighboring town, a woodworking shop, a photo from a local Chamber of Commerce event. He looked older, grayer, softer around the edges. But unmistakably the same man from my mother's photo. I was 29, and for the first time, I stared at the face of my father. He'd been living 20 miles away all these years, and my hands hovered over the keyboard, torn between disbelief and rage. 20 miles. That was the distance between lies and truth. Between the mother who'd built her life on silence and the father who had apparently built furniture instead of trying to find me. A part of me wanted to close the laptop, pretend I'd never seen any of it. Just crawl back into the comfort of familiar hurt. But the other part, the one that had carried humiliation, confusion, betrayal, all those parts lit a fuse that I needed to hear it from him. By evening, I was parked outside his shop, a quiet building painted dove grey, with a wooden sign that read Avery and Sons Woodworks. My stomach twisted at that word. Sons. Plural. I hadn't expected that. Inside, the place smelled like pine and varnish. Tools everywhere, each one carefully placed. Sawdust clung to the air, catching in the golden light that spilled through the windows. A man was bent over a workbench, sanding the edge of a small table. The rhythmic rasping of paper against wood was steady, unhurried. He turned when the bell above the door chimed. For a moment, we just stared. His hair was silver now, his face lined but kind. He wiped his hands on a cloth, confusion pinching his brow as he studied me. Afternoon, he said. Can I help you? The words lodged in my throat. I had imagined this moment 100 ways, dramatic, tearful, maybe even angry. But standing there in front of him, all the fury melted into something smaller. Something stunned. I don't know, I said softly. Maybe. He smiled politely, still waiting. I stepped closer. You're Thomas Avery? I am, he said slowly, like he was trying to remember if my face came with my voice. And you are. Every instinct screamed not to answer. But the truth had been denied too long. My name's Maria, I told him. Maria Carter. Something in his expression shifted. The air between us thickened, and his smile faltered. He stared a second too long, as if the syllables of my name had carved open an old wound. Carter, he repeated, almost a whisper. As in, Lillian? I nodded. His hand trembled slightly as he set down the sandpaper. He didn't look surprised. Just wrecked. There was grief in him, old, well-worn grief that had been waiting quietly for decades. I knew this day might come, he said finally. Then why didn't you come first? I asked. He looked away, jaw tightening. Because your mother told me not to. The words sliced clean through me. She lied to me. She said you were dead. He exhaled, pressing his palms against the table he'd been sanding, almost as if bracing himself. She wanted to protect you. From me, from what happened. What did happen? His silence was a long, uneven thing. The kind of silence you can hear the past moving through. Finally, he began. Your mother and I met at the hospital. I was helping with the woodwork for the children's ward. She was starting one of her first nursing rotations. God, she was bright, always humming to herself. She used to bring me coffee in the evenings, just to have an excuse to talk. I stayed still, listening. I was married, he said, voice barely audible. Unhappily. But that doesn't excuse what I did. Lillian knew, but we were drawn to each other anyway. It was one of those things you tell yourself you can control until it's too late. She got pregnant, I whispered. He nodded. When she told me, I wanted to do the right thing. I was ready to leave my wife. But my father, he made sure that didn't happen. He threatened her. Paid her to disappear quietly before anyone found out. She never took that money, I said. I know, he replied, eyes distant. She just left. And I stayed. Coward that I was, I let her go. Rage flickered in my chest. You didn't look for me. I tried, he said quickly. 4 years. But she moved, changed her name. The last word I had was that she'd adopted you under her maiden name to hide the past. He looked at me then, truly looked, and I saw years of what IFS reflected in his eyes. I saw you once, he said, almost apologetic. At the farmer's market. You were still small. She was holding your hand. I wanted to say something, but she turned and saw me, and in her eyes, he stopped, voice cracking. She begged me not to. So I didn't. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear slid down my wrist. Everything inside hurt, not from the lie, but from the gravity of realizing two people had built whole lives out of loving and losing each other, with me trapped quietly between them. It's not fair, I said, my voice shaking. You were there. You both were. And I had to grow up believing half of me was dead. He stepped closer, slow as though approaching something fragile. You have every right to hate me for that. I don't know what I feel, I admitted. Neither of us spoke after that. The quiet between us held too many years. He walked to a small shelf by the wall and pulled out a weathered cigar box. Inside were folded letters bound with a thin red ribbon. He handed them to me. "I wrote every year on your birthday," he said. "Never sent them. I didn't even know where to." I slid one open, dated from when I was 5. "I saw a little girl at the park today with your hair color. I wonder if you have your mother's laugh." The ink had faded in places, smudged from fingerprints. These weren't new tears. They were years old. I looked up. "Do you ever tell your family about me?" He shook his head. "My wife passed some years ago. My son, your half-brother, knows very little. I thought I'd tell him one day, but the longer you carry a secret, the harder it is to set it down." I didn't stay long after that. My mind was too full, my emotions too brittle. He walked me to the door, the late afternoon light soft against his face. As I turned to leave, he said quietly, "You look like her." That night, I drove aimlessly until the sky turned violet. Every memory replayed: my mother's steady smile, her careful silences, her soft laughter every time I asked about my father. It all made too much sense now. She wasn't just protecting me from heartbreak. She was protecting herself from losing me. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I saw her standing in the doorway, waiting. No words passed between us as I got out of the car. She could tell by my eyes that I knew everything. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as a figure who held all the answers, but as a woman who had been scared, flawed, and desperate to love me right, no matter what it cost her. But forgiveness doesn't bloom overnight. It's built slowly, across the scar tissue of truth. That night, I didn't scream, didn't accuse. I just stood there, holding the box of letters my father had kept all these years. "I found him," I said quietly. And her face, her beautiful, weary face, crumbled all over again. He called 2 days later. I was standing in the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator breaking the stillness, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. For a long moment, I just stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I answered. "Hello? Maria." His voice sounded careful. Older, softer in tone, but with that traces of certainty I'd heard before. "It's Thomas." I didn't say anything at first. The sound of his voice did something strange to me. It felt both foreign and painfully familiar, like hearing a song you've somehow known your whole life but can't quite place where from. "I wanted to check," he continued slowly, "that you got home safe. And that you're okay." I looked out the window. My mother's car wasn't in the driveway. It was just me, silence, and the ache between two truths that refused to sit quietly in the same room. "I don't know what I am," I said. "But I'm still here." He sighed, long and heavy. "That's a start." There was a pause before he added, softly, "Would you let me see you again? Not to dig up the past, just to talk." I surprised myself by saying yes. We met at a small cafe by the river that weekend. It was quiet, full of morning light and clinking cups. He was already there when I arrived, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes caught in some distant thought until he noticed me. He stood as I approached, that awkward smile again, the one that said he didn't know if he was allowed to act like a father. I didn't know if I wanted him to. "Hi," he said gently. "Hi." I echoed. He gestured to the seat across from him, and I Saturday. The silence between us was thick with years of unsaid things. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I said honestly. He laughed quietly. "You sound like her." The waitress slid by, setting down another coffee for me. The smell of roasted beans and bread hung in the air, warm and grounding. For the first time, I let myself look at him properly, at how time had softened the definition in his face but not erased it. His eyes, a muted hazel, carried that same tired kindness I'd seen in my mother's on her good days. I opened my mouth, then stopped. My voice felt caught somewhere between curiosity and anger. "Do you ever think about me?" He didn't hesitate. "Every day." Something inside me twisted at how easily he said it. I wanted to believe him, but belief requires trust, and I'd forgotten how to give that freely. "I used to imagine what kind of person you'd grow into," he went on quietly. "I kept those letters because they were all I had. I always hoped one day, fate would be kind enough to let me give them to you." I traced the edge of my coffee cup with my finger. "You could have fought harder." He sighed. "I could have. But courage isn't something you always have in the moments that matter most." He began to tell me about his life, the shop, his son, how he'd tried to build something good out of the broken parts he had left. He spoke about his marriage, not as an excuse but as a confession. I stayed because she threatened to leave with my boy if I went after your mother, he said. And I'd already lost one child I hadn't even met. He looked at me then, voice catching. I didn't want to lose too. There were no easy words to respond with. I just nodded faintly, feeling tears I refused to let fall. So you built furniture instead, I said quietly. He smiled sadly. Something to keep my hands busy when my heart wasn't. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but the edges of my anger softened a little. For the first time, I saw not the villain of my mother's grief, but a man who had been scared, flawed, and very, very human. When I finally asked about my half-brother, his expression shifted, unsure. Ethan, he said. He's 23 now. Works with me at the shop. He's a good kid. Kind. Grounded. Does he know about me? Not yet, he admitted. But I want him to. If you'll let me. The idea of a half-brother, a stranger who shared half my blood, felt both thrilling and terrifying. You think he'd want to meet me? He smiled softly. I think he'd be lucky to. We left the cafe and stood by the water for a while, the river murmuring below the bridge. He pointed out a small wooden bench tucked under the willow trees, one he'd built years ago. Your mother helped design that one, he said. She loved that spot. Said the water sounded like peace. I followed his gaze, imagining her younger there, laughing. It didn't hurt as sharply this time, it just felt heavy, like the memory belonged to both of them and somehow to me too. She said you left, I whispered after a long time. He nodded, eyes still on the water. She wasn't wrong. I did. Out of fear, out of weakness. But I never stopped loving her, or you. I just didn't know how to undo what I'd already done. For a long while, neither of us moved. Seagulls passed overhead, their reflections splitting across the water's surface. The breeze carried the faint smell of earth and salt and something like forgiveness. Before we parted, he reached into his coat pocket. I want you to have this, he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a copy of my birth document, the one my mother had hidden away, but with a note scribbled on the back in his handwriting. No matter what she told you, you were wanted. Always. Dad. The word hit hard. Dad. A name I'd never said to anyone before. We hugged, awkward, trembling, incomplete, but it was something. He smelled faintly of cedar and sawdust. It reminded me of home, though not the one I'd grown up in. Later that night, I went to see my mother. She was sitting at her small dining table, a cup of tea untouched in front of her, the faint yellow light from the lamp warming her face. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes filled with something that looked like both fear and yearning. You went, she said quietly. I had to. She nodded, her lips pressing together. Did he tell you? Everything, I said softly. Or enough. She stared at her hands, fingers twisting together. I always knew he'd come back in some way. Even if it was through you. He didn't come back, I said. I went looking. Her breath caught, and when she looked at me again, her expression was raw. Pain and love tangled into something wordless. Was he okay? Yes, I said. He's okay. A long silence settled between us. Then I added, he still loves you. A tear spilled down her cheek before she could hide it. After all that time, we sat there, the quiet of the house filling with everything neither of us needed to say. The truth had hurt us, but it had also unburied something gentle. Something that could finally breathe. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was warm, calloused, trembling. I don't know if I did right by you, she whispered. You did, I said. Just, not the way you think. She smiled faintly then, through her tears. You always were stronger than me. For the first time, I didn't correct her. I just let the moment exist, the fragile peace between us, the kind people fight their whole lives to find. That night, lying in bed, I opened my father's note again. The ink gleamed faintly under the soft lamplight. You were wanted. Always. It didn't stitch every wound shut, but it started something. A slow healing. A quiet understanding that love can be deeply flawed and still be love. And for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. The secret didn't stay confined to our kitchen or my heart for long. In a small town like ours, Silence travels slower than gossip. And by the time the truth reached the edge of Holloway Street, it was no longer the truth. It had been stretched, twisted, painted with colors meant to sting. It started with whispers. Someone had seen my car parked outside Avery and Sons. Then another spotted me having coffee with Thomas by the river. By Friday afternoon, the nurses at St. Agnes were already murmuring. "Did you hear? Lillian Carter's daughter found her real father. The man from the hospital. The married one." By the next week, affair had turned into scandal. I remember walking into the grocery store that Monday and feeling the shift in the air. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed me across aisles. The checker at the counter, Mrs. Finley, the same woman who watched me grow up and used to sneak extra candy into my bags, wouldn't meet my eyes. Nobody said it outright, but you could feel it. The weight of knowledge disguised as judgment. When I got home, my mother was sitting by the window again. The curtains half drawn, the afternoon light cutting across her lap. Her hands cradled a chipped mug, gone cold long ago. "Someone called from the hospital," she said quietly. "They heard." I set the groceries on the counter. The sound of plastic bags crinkling filled the silence. "What did they say?" "That maybe I should take a few weeks off." She didn't look up, her voice steady but brittle. "It's not official, but I know what that means." My chest tightened. "They can't do that." She smiled faintly, eyes still on the window. "Of course they can. They don't say it's because of gossip, but people talk. Administration listens. And sometimes, reputation echoes louder than truth." The words sat between us like a punishment neither of us deserved. She finally turned toward me, giving that small, tired smile she wore whenever she was trying to make me feel okay, even when she was breaking. "I should have told you years ago. Maybe then, I could have protected us from this." She didn't cry. That was somehow worse. Over the following weeks, everything changed. Friends I'd known since childhood avoided my calls. Neighbors who once waved over fences now turned away. At church, whispers felt like drafts brushing the back of my neck. I tried to pretend it didn't matter, that truth was supposed to bring peace, but the truth, untended, can be brutal. Even Tara entered the rumor cycle again. She didn't contact me directly, but I knew her fingerprints were there, the way people mentioned details that only she could have known. One afternoon, while buying coffee, I overheard two women at the next table talking. "She's the one from that girls' night," one hissed. "The one who didn't know her own father. Found him though, didn't she?" the other replied, smug. Some men don't go far when the woman's still waiting. I stood there frozen, heat prickling at the back of my neck. Shame, anger, quiet defiance all tangled together until I couldn't tell one from the other. For a moment, I imagined standing up, turning to them, and shouting, "It's my story, not your entertainment." But the urge melted just as fast. People like that feed on reaction, so I left. That afternoon, I drove to the outskirts of town, to the small woodworking shop where my father stood sanding a tabletop, shoulders slightly hunched. He noticed me right away, wiping his hands on a rag before smiling faintly. "I heard it's getting loud back in town," he said. "Loud," I echoed. "That's one way to put it." He gestured for me to sit on a stool by the counter. The smell of sawdust felt almost medicinal now, familiar, forgiving. "You can't control what people think," he said softly. "Only how long you let their words stay with you." I looked at his hands, calloused, steady, the same hands that built things to last, and wondered how he carried that quiet strength after all those years. "They're blaming her," I said. "Not me." "Her. Because she's easier to blame," he replied. "It's always the woman who pays the price." The bitter truth of that settled deep. At home, my mother had started moving differently, slower, more careful. She avoided town, avoided church. Our dinners grew quiet again, full of unspoken apologies. I could tell she was bracing herself for the day the hospital would make her leave for good. "I'll be fine," she kept saying. "Just time to rest. Maybe start over somewhere else." But I couldn't bear the thought of her leaving the only place she'd ever built a life. One evening, I caught her standing by the back door, phone in hand, fingers trembling slightly. "Who are you calling?" I asked, she startled, slipping the phone into her pocket. "No one." "Don't lie to me again," I said, not unkindly. Her expression cracked. Then she whispered, "I thought about calling him." Just once. Thomas. She nodded. Not for me. For you. To ask him to protect you from all this. A strange ache filled my chest, love, shame, anger, all stitched together. I don't need protecting, I said quietly. Not anymore. She reached for my arm. You're still my child. I know. But I'm not a secret anymore. The look in her eyes, broken pride mixed with hope, told me she finally understood. A week later, there was a community fundraiser at the hospital for the children's ward. It was a tradition my mother never missed, even now. I told her she didn't have to go, that people would stare, that it wasn't worth the pain. But she only smiled at me across the mirror while fastening her earrings. They don't get to write my story for me, she said. I watched her walk through those hospital doors with her head held high, her white nursing badge pinned proudly in place. The room fell to quiet murmurs when we entered. But she didn't flinch when one of the older nurses, a woman who used to share lunch breaks with her, whispered something as we passed. My mother simply turned, smiled gently, and said, "You can ask me directly, Patty. I promise I'll answer better than a rumor will." Patty went red, muttering something about the food, and disappeared. It was a small moment. But it crowned her with dignity later that evening, as children's laughter filled the halls and the town mayor spoke from the stage. People began talking again, but differently this time. About how long my mother had been serving the community. About how she'd never turned away a patient. About how everyone makes mistakes when it comes to love. It didn't erase the gossip, but it softened it. People remembered her humanity, and standing there beside her, I realized that maybe truth doesn't ruin reputations, it reveals what they were built on. By the time we got home that night, a strange quiet peace had settled over the drive back. My mother leaned against her seat and said softly, "I think your father would have been proud to see you there." I smiled. His not would have been. His still here. She blinked, realizing what I meant. "You're still seeing him?" "Sometimes," I said. "Just to talk." Her lips parted like she wanted to protest, but she stopped herself. Instead, she nodded. "Good. You deserve to know him in ways I couldn't." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Does he ask about me?" "All the time." She looked away, but the faintest, bittersweet smile tugged at her lips. "Then tell him I'm doing fine. Even if it's not true." Weeks passed. The noise in town died down slowly, replaced by the next story, the next curiosity. My mother returned to work part-time. People still looked, still murmured, but there was respect mixed in now. Hard-earned, but real. Some evenings, I'd visit the shop, watching my father and my half-brother, Ethan, plane wood together. Eventually, I found myself helping, clumsy at first, but patient. The rhythm of sandpaper against grain always reminded me of something my mother used to say, "You can't rush something meant to last." Ethan didn't know everything yet, not the full story, but he knew enough to welcome me without question. "You've got his eyes," he said once. And her calm. That made me smile. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like I had to choose which half of me to love. The world still whispered about our story sometimes, but I'd learned something from both of them, my mother's grace and my father's quiet endurance. The town might have taken our secrets, but they couldn't define our truth. It would still take time to unlearn anger, time to forgive fully, time to heal the fracture that had once split my family open. But watching my mother laugh again at dinner, and seeing my father wave as we drove past his shop, I understood something simple: love, once denied, doesn't die. It waits. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, it comes back in softer forms. It was early evening when everything finally came full circle. The sky was dimming, painted in soft strokes of orange and violet. The kind of quiet hour when things end, or begin again. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the folded box of letters on the table, the ones my father had written all those years. My mother's tea sat beside it, untouched again. She emerged from her room, wearing one of her softer cardigans, the blue one I'd always loved. The one she used to wear on Sundays when the world felt peaceful. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, wisps framing her tired face. "I knew this day would come," she said, voice steady but low. "The one where you'd want to say everything you've been holding." I looked up, unsure where to start. "I don't know if I want to fight." "Then don't," she said gently. "Just speak." She sat across from me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a moment, we stayed there like that, quiet. The air between us thick with all the years of silence, half-truths, and love that had survived them. "You lied to me," I said finally. She nodded once. "I did. You made me think he was gone. That he never existed beyond some perfect story." Her voice trembled slightly. "Because the truth wasn't perfect. It was ugly, and painful, and it could have broken you before you were ready." "You think it didn't break me now?" I asked. "You think finding out like this was easier?" Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "I know it wasn't. I'm sorry. I needed to grow up knowing the truth," I said, my tone calmer than I felt. "Even if it hurt." She bowed her head, hands fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I wasn't as strong as you think. When you were born, I'd lost everything, my job, my reputation, the man I thought I'd spend my life with. And I was terrified the world would take you away too. You didn't trust me to stay," I whispered. She looked up, her eyes shining. "I didn't trust myself to be enough." We both sat with that a while. The quiet clock ticking behind us, one sound at a time, stretching between every breath. Her shoulders looked smaller now, thinner somehow, like she'd been carrying every year of silence across them. I reached for one of the letters and slid it across the table. "He wrote these," I said. She looked down at it but didn't touch it. "I know. You knew. I used to find them in my mailbox, left without return addresses. I'd tear them up before I could read them. Every time, I told myself I was protecting you. But maybe I was protecting myself from remembering what I'd lost." I stared at her. "You could have told me that. You could have trusted me with that truth." "I didn't know how." She smiled faintly through her tears. "You were always so full of light, Maria. I didn't want the weight of my mistakes to dim that." The way she said my name cracked something inside me. Because even now, even after everything, her love was in it, so fierce it hurt. "I met him," I said softly. "I met Thomas." Her breath hitched, just slightly, but she didn't say anything. Her eyes searched mine. Hope flickered there, faint but alive. "How was he?" she managed to ask. "Older," I said. "Gentle. Regretful." She nodded. "He was always gentle." "He loves you," I added. This time she did cry. Not the quiet, suppressed kind, but the real kind, the kind that spills out when a dam finally gives way. "I didn't want to hate him," she whispered between tears. "I just didn't know how to forgive him. He left when I needed him the most. And all these years, I told myself it was easier to hate a ghost than to miss a man who was still breathing." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. For a moment, she flinched, surprised, almost afraid, but then her fingers tightened around mine. "I understand now," I said. "You did what you thought was right." "I did what I knew how to do," she corrected softly. Right or wrong, it was all I had. The sun had nearly set by then, casting long stripes of amber light across her face. It made her look both older and younger at once. The kind of beauty time doesn't erase, it just etches deeper. "I saw him smile when he talked about you," I said. It wasn't bitterness. It was something like peace. Her lips trembled. "He always said I smiled too much. That it scared him how easily I could forgive. Maybe he remembers that." The silence between us softened. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like distance. It felt like rest. She leaned back, wiping her eyes. "Do you love him?" I thought about it, every part of it, the discovery, the meeting, the confusion, and then nodded slowly. "I think I'll learn to." "That's good," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "That's all any of us can do. Learn to love the truth, even when it terrifies us." We sat there, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady chorus of crickets outside. It hit me then that I wasn't angry anymore, not really. The hurt was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was something rounder, like scar tissue, a reminder that pain had lived here but didn't rule here. "I want you to see him," I said suddenly. "You and him. One last time." Her head lifted sharply. "No, why not?" Her hands trembled. "Too much time. Too many things I can't take back." "It's not about taking anything back," I said gently. "It's about letting go." She shook her head, eyes distant. Some things don't fit into the life we have left. Maybe not perfectly, I said. But maybe beautifully. The corner of her mouth lifted at that. It was a tired smile, but a real one. 2 days later, I drove her to the store near the river, where my father worked. She didn't know until we parked. When she realized where we were, her hand went to the door handle like instinct. Maria, she said firmly. Don't make me do this. But her voice wasn't angry. It was shaking. I turned the ignition off, leaving only the sound of the river outside. Mom, I said softly. He's not asking for forgiveness. And you're not giving it. You're both just letting the years breathe again. For a long while, she stayed frozen. Then, slowly, she nodded. We stepped inside the shop together. The bell over the door chimed, and my father looked up. The moment his eyes found her, the world seemed to hush. He dropped the chisel he'd been holding, and for a second, neither of them moved. Lillian, he said finally, her lips parted, trembling. Thomas. I stepped back, letting them have the space they were owed. He walked toward her slowly, each step measured. She looked smaller standing there, but her shoulders stayed straight. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, he said, voice unsteady. You weren't supposed to, she replied, though her eyes softened. He smiled sadly. And yet you came. No, she said, looking at me. She brought me. He followed her gaze. Then I owe her everything. The silence between them felt sacred. It was the sound of something ending and something else, maybe forgiveness, beginning. He reached out, not touching her at first, waiting. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, just for a moment. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, human, real. When we left, my mother didn't speak for a long time. But as we drove away, she reached over and rested her hand on mine. You did the right thing, she said quietly. So did you, I replied, and for once, we both believed it. That night, I found her asleep on the couch, the faintest smile on her lips. The clock ticked steadily by her side, the same sound that had filled our house my entire life. For the first time, it didn't sound like a reminder of time lost. It sounded like time continuing. Months passed. Seasons changed so gently that I barely noticed at first. The garden outside our house began to bloom again, patches of color among the wild green, just how my mother always liked it. The azaleas came back first, followed by daffodils pushing through the stubborn soil. She started spending more mornings out there, kneeling quietly in the dirt, humming to herself while pruning stems that had overgrown. It wasn't the same hum from years ago. It was softer, slower, tinged with reflection. But it was music all the same. Life, I realized, rarely ends in one clear line. It bends. It circles. It forgives. My days settled into something steadier too. I still visited Thomas most weekends now. Sometimes we'd sit out behind his shop while Ethan worked on projects nearby. They'd bicker like good-natured family do, teasing about measurements or wood choices, and I'd listen, smiling at the strange comfort of belonging to both worlds. For once. One afternoon, as we sat under the tree behind the shop, Thomas handed me a small carved figure, a flower, delicate and unfinished. It's for her, he said. I turned it in my hand, tracing the smooth petals. Mom. He nodded. I used to carve these for her back when we worked at the hospital. She liked lilies. Always said they reminded her of grace. Something caught in my throat. You still remember. He smiled faintly. Some memories are stubborn. They survive everything, time, silence, even regret. I looked at him for a long moment, thinking how strange it was that two people could share a story so fractured and yet still find gentleness in its echoes. You should tell her that yourself, I said finally. I will, he said, though his voice was quiet, uncertain. He wasn't the man my mother once knew, not exactly. Time had reshaped him. But maybe that was what made forgiveness possible. They were both new versions of themselves, meeting in a space that didn't demand the past to change. At home, my mother was sitting in her usual spot by the window when I returned, the light of late afternoon spilling across her lap. I handed her the wooden flower. She turned it slowly in her palms, eyes shining. He always did have patient hands, she murmured. Maybe he'd like to see you again, I said. Properly, this time. She smiled, setting the carving down gently. Maybe someday. Then, after a pause, not yet. But I'm not afraid of the idea anymore. That was enough. For the first time, She wasn't avoiding the past, she was living alongside it. The following weekend, my half-brother Ethan asked if I wanted to help with a community project his company was doing, a playground renovation on the edge of town. I said yes. We worked, building benches and painting swings. Neighbors passed by, watching. Some smiled, some didn't. But their silence didn't sting anymore. It just was. And that was okay. When my mother arrived later with refreshments for the workers, I noticed people greeting her again, the same nurses, the same neighbors who once turned away. One even hugged her. Time, it seemed, had decided to choose compassion after all. That night, as we ate dinner together, the three of us, plus Ethan, it felt simple. Not dramatic, not nostalgic, just quietly right. My mother laughed at something Ethan said. Thomas smiled in that small, shy way he had, and I realized I'd stopped waiting for things to go wrong. For the first time, the story wasn't running on pain anymore. It had found a gentler rhythm. Some weeks later, I returned to that river cafe, the same one where I first spoke to my father. It had become my little ritual. The air smelled faintly of spring rain. I ordered coffee and opened a notebook I'd started keeping, full of letters to myself. Letters like the ones he had written to me. Dear Maria, one entry began, "You are made from two kinds of love, the kind that risked everything and the kind that stayed through silence. Both are real. Both made you." I sometimes read those words out loud when the noise inside got too loud. They reminded me that even broken origins can grow something whole. My mother visited the shop one final time that summer. She didn't tell me beforehand. I only found out because Thomas called later that evening. "She came," he said, voice trembling with what sounded like awe. "She came by herself." "What happened?" I asked. He chuckled softly. "We just talked. About you. About those years. We didn't fix the past, but we stopped fighting it." I could see it in my mind, her standing in that shop, sunlight slanting through dusty windows, both of them older but still recognizable to each other. Maybe she smiled. Maybe he cried. Maybe neither did, because sometimes peace needs only silence. After that, she started writing letters of her own, short notes she mailed to no one in particular. She called them her unburdenings. I found one on her dresser months later. It read, "Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a garden you tend, every day, until you can finally breathe among the flowers." By autumn, the town's whispers had faded completely. People learned new stories to tell. New scandals to discuss. Our names weren't one of them anymore. My mother retired from nursing and began volunteering at the same hospital, helping in the children's ward she once worked in, the one Thomas had donated benches to years ago. Sometimes I'd go there to see her, find her with a child in her lap, reading a storybook in her calm, honeyed voice. Parents loved her. The doctors respected her. And the world carried on. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees, she turned to me and said quietly, "You know what I learned?" "What?" "That truth costs less than lies in the long run. But only if you pay for it with kindness." It was the kind of thing only she could say, soft but sharp, lived. I leaned my head against her shoulder, and we watched the fireflies flicker in the yard. The air smelled like grass and old rain. There were no more secrets between us now, no more walls built from what ifs. Only the small, durable peace that comes after a storm. The last time I saw Thomas that year, he was finishing a wooden bench for the park, one he planned to dedicate quietly. He asked if I could help choose the inscription. I thought about it for a long moment before suggesting a single line, "For love that finds its way home." He smiled when he carved it into the wood, his hands sure and steady. "That's perfect," he said. I didn't tell him that my mother eventually visited that bench almost every Sunday, sitting quietly for an hour before heading home. She never said much about why, and I never asked. Some stories don't need narration. Every now and then, I'd sit beside her there, two women bound not by secrets anymore, but by truth lived fully. However imperfectly. Looking back, I realized that the night Tara humiliated me, the night I thought my life had collapsed, was also the night everything real began to surface. Pain had been the door I didn't want to open, and love had been waiting quietly on the other side. Now, whenever people ask me about my family, I don't hesitate anymore. I tell them I was raised by a woman brave enough to face her own shame, and found by a man humble enough to carry his. Both of them flawed. Both of them mine, and somehow, between the two of them, I learned what truth really means, not perfection, not purity, but presence. To stay. To forgive. To keep choosing love, one ordinary morning at a time. A year later, everything looked different, quieter, simpler, settled in a way I hadn't realized I'd been craving all my life. The house on Holloway Street felt warmer than it ever had. The same walls that once echoed with silence now carried softer sounds, the clink of teacups, the rustle of pages, the gentle creak of the rocking chair by the window. My mother had filled the corners with new life, plants, photos, laugh lines that time couldn't erase. Healing, I discovered, doesn't announce itself. It arrives like dawn, slow and patient, lighting one corner at a time. Sometimes, when I sat on the back porch watching her garden, I'd catch her humming that same tune, the one she used to sing when I was a little girl, the one that always sounded like hope disguised as habit. She didn't hum to fill the silence anymore. She hummed because she could. Thomas still visited sometimes. Not as often now, we didn't need him to. There was no urgency anymore, no aching question left unanswered. He'd drop by on quiet afternoons to bring us bread from the bakery or to show us something new he'd carved. Once, he and my mother sat together at the kitchen table in easy silence while I folded laundry nearby. There wasn't tension anymore, just gentleness. Two people who had lived long enough to stop running from their own hearts. He asked her once, half joking, if she ever forgave him. She smiled, stirring her tea, and said, "It's not about forgiving. It's about remembering differently." He nodded, smiled back, and they both looked out the window, as though the past had transformed. From a wound into a shared story. That was the last time I saw them in the same room, but I didn't need to see it again. Peace had finally won its quiet battle. The town, for all its noise, grew used to our story too. People stopped whispering, partly because time moved on, partly because those who stayed learned something from us about endurance, about humanity. At the annual harvest fair, someone mentioned how brave my mother had been to return to work after all that noise. She only laughed and said, "Bravery isn't about fighting back. It's about showing up the next day anyway." That line stayed with everyone who heard it, including me. It's strange how something so small can reshape the way people see the world. I'd like to tell you I forgot about Tara. That I forgave her, or that she learned her lesson and apologized. But life doesn't always tidy itself neatly. She moved away not long after the scandal died down. Word spread she got a new job in another city. We never spoke again. For a while, I told myself I didn't care, but some nights, I still thought about how her cruelty had almost destroyed both me and my mother, and yet, somehow, set everything free. In a way, I ended up forgiving her too, but not for her sake. For mine. Because holding on to resentment felt like carrying around a stone in my chest that never stopped pressing down, and one day, I simply decided to set it down. The lesson she forced me to learn was one I'll carry forever. Sometimes betrayal is the door through which the truth finally walks in. A few months after my mother's 60th birthday, I found her sitting by the river, our river. The one where I had first found answers. Sunlight flickered across the water, catching the silver in her hair. Beside her on the bench was the carving Thomas had made, the wooden lily, its edges now polished smooth by countless touches. She looked peaceful, as if the weight she'd carried for decades had finally settled somewhere gentle. "It's strange," she said as I sat beside her. "When you spend so long protecting a lie, you forget what living honestly feels like." "What does it feel like?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Like breathing without apology." We stayed there for hours, saying little. The world kept moving around us, children riding bicycles, a couple arguing softly in the distance, a dog splashing near the bank. And in the middle of it all, we were simply two women sharing the same quiet moment that used to belong to fear, but now belonged to peace. When we finally stood to leave, she looked back at the bench. "He built that one right," she said softly. "It's still standing." "So are we," I replied. She nodded, and for the first time, I believed her smile was free of echoes. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook. It's something I do often now, write things I wish my younger self could have heard, back before everything unraveled. I wrote, "Don't be afraid when truth breaks your heart. It only hurts because it's setting you free. Remember that love can fail you and still remain sacred. And one day, you'll look back at the ruins and realize they were just foundations waiting to be built differently." When I finished, I closed the notebook and looked around the room that once held so much quiet grief. The walls seemed to breathe differently now, like the house itself had forgiven us too. Some mornings, I visit the hospital where my mother now volunteers, just to watch her in that children's ward, her laughter echoing down the hallway, her voice still strong. She's lighter on her feet these days, her smile unguarded. The nurses there call her Miss Lily now, a play on her middle name, the one from her past. Every time I hear it, I think about how nothing truly lost is ever beyond naming again. You can always reclaim what used to hurt you and make it mean something else. A year after Thomas's bench went up, the community added a bronze plaque beneath the carving. It reads, "Dedicated to the ones who stayed when truth came calling." My mother didn't ask for it, but she visits once a month anyway. She sits there quietly, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing at all. And when she leaves, she never looks back, because some memories, she says, need to face forward. That I think about that girl's night sometimes, the one where it all began. The humiliation that burned through me so sharply then feels like a lifetime away now. It doesn't hurt anymore, it feels like the start of something sacred. Without it, I'd never have known who I really was, or where I truly came from, and more importantly, I wouldn't have learned to forgive the people who shaped me through their mistakes as much as through their love. Life has a strange poetry like that, one written in reversals, where pain teaches peace, and shame births clarity. When I tell my story, I don't say it with bitterness or pride. I say it the way you tell a bedtime story, softly, with gratitude, with understanding. Because I lived it. And I survived it, but more importantly, I turned it into something that could make me whole. That if I had to leave you with one truth, one lesson carved from it all, it would be this: love is not clean. It's messy, flawed, and sometimes heartbreakingly late. But when it's honest, when it's finally spoken, it builds things that don't fall apart. Even if those things are made from the broken pieces of what used to be. So take your time forgiving the people who failed you. Take even longer forgiving yourself for believing their lies. But when the chance comes to love again, yourself, your family, your truth, take it, because what begins as pain can end as purpose. What starts as betrayal can become belonging, and sometimes the story that once felt like punishment becomes the very one that saves you. And that's my story, baby. A story about truth, forgiveness, and how sometimes the messiest parts of life end up being the most honest ones. Maybe you've lived something like that too. Maybe you've carried a secret that wasn't yours to keep, or loved someone you had to forgive just to breathe again. But if you have, then you already know, peace doesn't come easy. You have to fight for it, softly, daily, with patience and prayer. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have found your father, or kept your mother's secret buried where it couldn't hurt? Tell me down in the comments, baby. I read every single one because your stories matter just like mine. And if this story touched your heart, or even made you think for a minute, go on and like the video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that healing isn't shameful, and forgiveness is not weakness. And if you're new here, welcome, sugar. Go on and subscribe so you don't miss the next story we'll share together. There's always another lesson waiting, another heart to understand. Until next time, keep living, keep loving, and don't be afraid to tell your truth out loud.